Hello, friends. Welcome to the Diverse Thinking, Different Learning podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am thrilled to introduce today's guest, Samantha Moe. Samantha is a certified parent coach and speaker who has dedicated over 15 years to helping families navigate the complexities of raising emotionally intense children. With a master's degree in communication disorders and a background in sensory integration, play therapy, and emotional integration, Samantha brings a wealth of knowledge and expertise to our discussion. Please join me in welcoming Samantha Moe to the podcast.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Welcome, Samantha.
Hi.
It's so good to have you here. It's great to see you again.
Thank you. Same. So nice to see you.
Yes. And I'm so excited to have you on, that initial conversation that we had about the work that you do with emotionally intense kids kind of sparked my curiosity, reminded me of a number of families who have similar kiddos and want and are in need of support and guidance and strategies in terms of how to support them. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing your expertise and your experience with us. I'd love for you to talk about how you came to focus on these kiddos who are in need of what I think of as extra empathy, understanding, and support.
Yes, thank you for that. The feelings I think that we have for each other are mutual, like admiration and respect and excitement for the work that each other is doing in the world. With your work as a neuropsychologist, a lot of my families that have kids with big feelings go for some neuropsych testing because they're looking for some more information to see if that can guide the pathway so that they can help their child be more successful. And I think that there's so many incredible resources out there to help us keep our eyes on kids and support kids through the process. And while there are a lot of resources, it doesn't mean it's easy. And I know that's the work that you're doing. You're creating this hub of resources so parents can look at multiple modalities. And so let me just start by saying thank you for doing all of that work.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then when families reach me, I'm a certified parenting coach and a life coach. And so my field is really specific as the place to support parents. There are a lot of there are disciplines where a child might be taken to a certain therapeutic setting. And if they're focused on the child, there might be the parent check-in, but not really like the 1-hour session for parents that's specifically there to give them practical tools. And I started in this field because I was a speech language pathologist myself, working with autistic kids who were having really intense behavioral outbursts. And I felt like I should know better, or my education should have equipped me. I certainly had a full heart when it came to the purpose of my work in the world that felt very noble, to help autistic kids learn social skills and communicate so that they could make friends. And when I started having some of the same challenges that other professionals, or now that I'm a parent myself, and it hadn't been at the time 20 years ago, when I started realizing that one of the big common hurdles is, what do we do in those moments when a kid's brain is on fire? And what is the kid's brain is on fire? What does that even mean? There's a lot of neurological underpinnings to that. If we look at Dr. Daniel Siegel's work, the author of The Whole Brain Child, who talks about the downstairs brain and fight, flight, or freeze. Or even Stephen Porges with polyvagal theory, when you're really in fight mode or you're shutting down and you're having a hard time connecting socially. When we understand, sometimes we don't always understand all of the brain science behind it, but if we can use really common terms to integrate the research and the sciences, which is what I've dedicated my career to understand, oh, there's fire in the brain. Well, for kids, we know that how that looks for each individual kid.
Absolutely. And I love that description as fire in the brain, because really you're talking about this dysregulated, emotionally, behaviorally dysregulated kiddo. And they're dysregulated because of this overfiring of all of those neurons in their brain. And they don't have the ability to self-soothe, to self-calm, to kind of activate that part of their nervous system that calms the brain down. And so oftentimes parents, as we're looking at this behavioral dysregulation, the first thing we want to do is we want to make it stop, right?
Yeah,
We want to
that's
make
it.
it stop. We want our kids to feel better. And I think that's one of the reasons why, a number of reasons why I want to have you on the show, but it's one of the things you look at as well is the importance of understanding why kiddos are behaving in that emotionally intense way, right? And I talk a great deal about the importance of understanding why kids are struggling, either cognitively, in their school environment with learning or on the playground. And you do the same in terms of understanding what's beneath the challenging behaviors in emotionally intense kids. I'd love for you to share some insights into what typically triggers some of those behaviors.
Yeah, I love that. And you're using the language. It shows how many families you've worked with and how you understand the challenges that they're going through. I've worked with nearly 1,000 diverse families, and the language that we use, and I know you're a mom as the same as I. And so it's like we get in those moments and we're like, oh my gosh, there's hitting, or there's screaming, or there's door slamming, or there's ignoring, or there's digging in the heels, and we either want to like make it better or make it stop.
Yes.
Right. And when you understand what's beneath the behaviors, it gives you an action plan to make it better or make it stop. So my specialty is really looking from the parent side of things and the parent-child relationship in your home environment. What are some of the things that trigger fire in the brain? Resistance, defiance, things that look like manipulation or control behaviors. Well, the first exercise I'll take you through, if you're willing to play with me here.
Sure.
Okay, it's the no exercise. Okay, so I'm going to say the word no, and I want you to notice what it feels like in your body. I'll do this for 20 seconds. And listeners, I want you to notice what happens in your body or your mind as well. It's always interesting to know what's individually triggered. All right, so if you're ready and you're in a space where it's safe to close your eyes, do so. And notice what happens inside. No. Knock it off. Stop that. Oh, you always do. No. I said no. So open your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Shake it off a little bit. I know you and I can see each other visually and others can't, but I'm like putting my hands as an X across my shoulders and doing butterfly tapping. Like this can calm your own fight or flight stress response after something like that. So what did you notice in your body?
It's like the heart starts to race and then like little goosebumps on my skin, right?
Oh, good noticing. And so that's a physiological response of your heart rate increases, your breath may have gotten more shallow. That often goes together with your heart rate increasing. You felt those little goosebumps on your skin. So these are physiological responses of stress from hearing the word no. And you're not actually in trouble. You're in a safe environment. We have a warm, compassionate relationship with one another. And so imagine what happens to a child who is already trending in their personality to have behavior that's controlling, demanding, resistant, defiant, doesn't like to be told what to do, stubborn, digs in their heels. And so they don't feel safe inside, or they want to be more in control. And if they just naturally hear no, you can't climb up there. No, I'm not giving you more of this. No, you need to pay attention right now. What happens is, for us as the parent in the situation, or the provider, the caregiver, the professional, we're thinking we're teaching our kid. We're teaching them right from wrong. We're helping them feel safe. They shouldn't be climbing over there. They need to pay attention. It's good for them to learn how to learn in school and have respect for authority, when this simple language is actually a trigger for more fight or flight reaction.
Right. And that's so important to know about those stress chemicals, and to make that link between stress chemicals and the fact that they can affect behavior and in reactions in ourselves and in the kids that we work with and the kids that we have in our homes, the kids that are our children. And I think when parents hear, okay, this is a chemical response, that kids are responding to the stress chemicals in their brain, the next question is, how do I help my child regulate those chemicals?
So good. I'm going to pause this and I'm going to ask a follow-up question and then answer it, because what naturally can come up is, yes, once we realize that there's stress chemicals in our child's brain, which is like the underpinning of fire in the brain in my mind. If I understand there's stress chemicals in the brain, then what I want to do is I want to calm that down. I want to calm fire. I want to have less adrenaline, because that's what's going to trigger things like lashing out and limbs flailing and, like our mouths spouting off things. We don't want to hear kids yelling. But the other important thing is that we have mirror neurons in our brain. So not only is your kid feeling stressed, but when you see them ratcheting up or escalating, or maybe you don't even see it, maybe it's subtle and you feel it. Just like, the kid wakes up on the wrong side of the bed, or you're like, oh my gosh, we're out running errands and I don't have a snack. And if you have a child who's sensitive to blood sugar levels, like you start getting nervous because you feel them kind of ratcheting up inside. Well, mirror neurons are like a mirror that we hold up and we look at our reflection. The mirror neurons in our brain reflect the state another person is in. And a lot of kids who are emotionally intense and have challenging behaviors, they have this higher baseline state of stress. And I want to really acknowledge that, because we're so attuned and responsive to the things and the people and the energy and the moods in our environment, I want to just take a moment and say, hey, by the way, if your kid's stressed, there's a good chance that you're navigating feeling stressed out simply by having this like wound up reactive body in the room with you. And maybe you have an 11-year-old, or maybe you have a 3-year-old, or maybe you have a 23-year-old. And so what that does is that can create more fire in your brain. And this is where, for you as the adult, this is where something like bringing our kids to a professional or reading a parenting book can be really challenging if we haven't understood this concept that your body has been under a lot of stress. And so sometimes changing our behavior or changing our kids' behavior and helping them thrive really isn't just about like the smattering of tips you see on Instagram and like the video reels and what can I do differently. It's like, if I'm going to lower my kids' stress, inherently in that equation is lowering the fight in your own body and your own brain.
Right. And I love that you talked about that bi-directional relationship, with our children with respect to, how we're feeling, our stress levels. I think I'd mentioned on a previous podcast episode, studies that have been done that look at the stress levels of parents who report high levels of stress. And they took cortisol levels of their kids and noted the relationship between the high levels of cortisol in kids who weren't reporting experiencing stress, but their children were. And that's a direct marker of stress, right? And so it shows this relationship that kids in an environment with stressed parents are also experiencing physiological stress as a result of their parents' stress.
Mm-hmm. That's right. That bidirectionality. So true.
Yeah. And it seems that it's important for parents, again, to gain insight into all of the things that you're sharing, but also help in identifying, what are some signs of stress? Because parents might be seeing some behaviors playing out and not recognize or make that connection to stress. Or, how do you identify when your child is feeling overwhelmed? And when do you intervene when you see it starting to escalate in a way that helps kids cope in the moment, but also develop coping skills for the future?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that's going to be the gray area where when we understand some of the brain-based parenting strategies that can calm fire in the brain, then we experiment with them and we say, one of the modern strategies that's getting a lot of airtime right now is basically using some form of empathy in your parenting. I feel like 10 years ago, people talked a lot about emotional intelligence. We want our kids to have emotional intelligence. Dr. Daniel Siegel, again, I love all of his work.
And he's yes.
Yeah. And he's coined a term or a phrase, name it to tame it. And it's, empathy, compassion. In attachment parenting, they call it attunement. Like, how do we label our kids' emotions? Or what the strategy itself is labeling a child's emotions, because when you name it, it calms that down in the geeky brain science world. We're going to talk about the limbic system. If you can label a child's emotions when they're feeling upset, it has the potential to help them feel seen and heard. So if I'm ranting about something, and I'm, my husband's in the house and my 3-year-old's playing in the living room, and my husband hears me ranting, if he's like trying to fix it for me and saying like, well, what if you try this? And I know you were hiring that person on your team, and I think you need to get more off your plate. It doesn't ever resolve that feeling or the behavior that I have of ranting around the house. I'm kind of like upset and agitated.
Right. Your amygdala is still overactive right now.
Exactly. Yes. Exactly. But if he looks at me, and this is a trained communication pathway that we have between each other, if he looks at me and he goes, honey, I see you're worrying about this, it stops me in my tracks. I'm like, oh, I thought I was ticked off, or I thought I was trying to find a solution, but really I'm feeling really worried. And it might cause me to break down in tears. It might stop me in my tracks, like I said. It might cause me to rant more and say like, and here are the other things that I'm worried about. But what that does is it helps my amygdala calm down. It helps me feel social bond. I'm not in these big feelings alone. And so by him labeling my emotions in that moment, it's going to create connection, and I'm going to calm down inside because I have good self-regulation, because I'm over 40 years old and I've been practicing it for a long time. Now, if we translate this into a parent-child interaction, there are times where you recognize, with my 3.5-year-old, if I say something like, oh, honey, you're really sad, we had to fly your auntie to the airport and you miss her, that might result in him having more tears, but he also might snuggle up in my lap and have this emotional experience and expression for a while. One of the well-known trauma therapists in the field is named Dr. Bruce Perry, and he wrote The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. And he talks about how if you're talking to like a middle schooler, an empathy conversation is going to last on average somewhere between 10 and 12 minutes. And so there's variations on this. So my point being that if my 3-year-old snuggles up on my lap, we might talk about it for 3, 4, or 6 minutes, and then he can kind of move along and run and play. But there are other moments where he's really ticked off and we're going into his safe space in the room because he's throwing and kicking and trying to hit me and push me out of the way so that he doesn't have to take a break and reset and take some breaths and calm down, as a regular part of child development and like having big experiences. But if I say something like, I see you're mad right now, he might become more enraged. So does labeling the emotion mean that, is this a good skill or is this a bad skill? And the answer is there are tools out there where they can be really effective tools, but we have to experiment with our own kids and understand their personality, the level of escalation of the situation, and learn, experiment with, when is this working? And meaning it helps it stop, or it helps them feel connected so that they can reset and it feels better over time.
Absolutely. And that's where having some support as a parent, when you're on this journey, when you're trying to better understand your child's behaviors, trying to establish a stronger and a more emotional connection to your kids, getting that additional support for navigating, what can seem like very complex and very, difficult situations is so important. And I know that as a parent, I often say, we make mistakes all the time, right? As a parent, you never do things perfectly every time. Are there common mistakes, adults, parents, caregivers make when trying to support emotionally intense kids?
For sure.
Particularly when they're trying to avoid fueling the fire, right? Are there ways to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first reflective question that I offer to you is, so for all you listeners, consider, first of all, what does your kid's fire look like? Okay, so you kind of have a vision of that. And now consider what adds fuel to the fire. And Karen, right off the bat, do you know what adds fuel to your kid's fire?
It depends on the day and what's causing the fire, right? Right. Sometimes it's siblings, right? It's the interaction between the two of them and kind of vying for our attention. They want to be heard first, or they want, what it is that they're trying to say, for us to understand what it is that they're trying to say, right? They might be trying to talk over each other, and that can cause, that firing in the brain. Right. Anger starts to build up.
Yes, exactly. And so when I ask this question in the parent group that I lead online, oftentimes parents will say, oh, well, of course I know, if they have a child who is aversive to touch, they'll say, if I try to do hands-on with my kid and do this thing that Samantha just described about safely guiding them into a calming corner or a calming spot in the room, that's going to add fuel to the fire. So we want to understand that about our kids. And I want anybody's initial, as a listener, I want your initial reaction to like let something really sink in about that, because there's truth and wisdom in that. And the other things that add fuel to kids' fire, so starting phrases with no, starting phrases with kids' names add fuel to the fire as well. And, like you can use nicknames or terms of endearment instead. But I remember this situation where I'm like, Johnny, okay, time for a social skills practice. Johnny, open the door. Johnny, remember not to slam it. Johnny, you need to sit right here. Johnny, do you remember what I said about that pencil and the sharp tip? So just like the word no, and we could say this to us as parents, are like, mom, 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 mom. It creates that agitation and that stress chemical response in the brain. So it's like learning how to also teach kids what to do without always trying to like get their attention or say their name repetitively. The other thing that we do is we overteach with logic. So I might say something like, Johnny, the reason we don't slam the door is because there's other kids in the hallway. And Johnny, the reason I'm asking you about your pencil is because one time you poked somebody and I want you to feel safe. And there's like all of this logic and language that we use, right? Because we're doing our job, air quotes.
Right.
Like we're teaching kids. But when a child is upset, when you're using logic, I'd like to say, like, if you're describing why and you hear yourself say, oh, because it's worthless. It's not sinking
They
in.
can't access it. They can't even process it. When they're in response mode, they can't, analyze what it is that you're telling them.
That's right. That's right. And these two things that we've talked about, I mean, we've only been talking for less than half an hour, but these two things, calming your own fire as the parent in the room and labeling a child's emotion and then being quiet and listening and letting them express more and then listening and reflecting it again without trying to say, but you can't because, but the reason we have to do this is because. Those are the two things that it often takes parents months of accountability, practice, sharing their successes, hearing from other families who are practicing it to actually change their behavior in those two realms. And when we do, it's a game changer for our kids, how they react to us and how they listen.
Right. And when you talk about kind of that calming piece, I really think about like this co-regulation, especially when we talk about this bi-directional relationship between parents and their kids. When your child is stressed, then you're stressed, and they're stressed because you're stressed. And then, it's just going back and forth, right? You're fueling each other's fire. But when you can calm the situation and engage in that co-regulation, then it also helps them, like you're saying, and then validate what it is that they're experiencing. Again, it calms them. It establishes that connection between the two of you, which you talked about. You gave the example of your child putting their head on your lap. Again, that's that connection piece. And we know how important connection is for resilience building and for helping to regulate that nervous system.
That's right. That's right. Connection. So for resilience building and regulating the nervous system. So when you said that, of course, I thought about the child. And because I feel like the child advocate and the parent advocate, it's the same thing. Like, where is the connection? How many times have we heard it takes a village to raise it? And it's like, but what about for parenting? We know culturally that when we are parenting in isolation, I had a friend say to me once in my 20s, he's like, oh, well, I can see why you feel lonely. You live in an apartment. By name, right. You are apart from other people. And I was like, oh yeah, where's my multi-generational living and like my community of people that I hang out with and cook dinner together instead of like living on my own in my 20s, right?
Right.
So I feel like the same thing is really true for parents. And when we are talking about strategies that seem simple, and they seem simple, but there's a lot of brain science behind it and a lot of experience at understanding, like, what is this? Where does the life coaching come into this? Why do we need to understand the science of habit change and like tapping into our own wisdom and finding cues that help us change our behavior? Because changing our behavior alone is really hard, especially when those two behaviors, practicing calm and labeling emotions, how many of us were raised in that environment? I mean, so for listeners, I'm going to invite you again, because I want you to think about this. Like, was your home calm? Did a parent or somebody in your life regularly label your emotions? Because if not, you're going to have the conditioning that makes these two skills really difficult to implement. And it's okay. Because now, like, what I don't want to do is, as parents, we can go into the shame spiral really quickly and feel badly about ourselves. And so what I'm doing in this parenting world is saying like, you're good. It's okay. You love your kids. Let's talk about your goals and keep like taking small steps on the plan and on the path in order to help you shift your approach so that you're mirroring and modeling something that you want your child to like mirror and model back to you.
Right. And I think the good thing about being, kind of on the earth at the time we are now is that we can now lean into a lot of the science. The science has taken place. We have data that we can use to help us to better support our kids. And like you're saying, many of us didn't have an environment and grow up in an environment where, again, our emotions were labeled, where there was co-regulation, where there was even logical reasoning for, explaining why we're doing certain things, why we're not doing certain things. It was just like, no, you're not doing that. And it's because I said so, right? That was the end of the conversation. And so I think the fact that you are integrating science and experience and your knowledge base from working with autistic kids and their families allows you to have that different perspective, but also really be transformative. And I'm thinking about your Mad to Glad blueprint and the approach that you take for positive communication and for parenting intense kids. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how it works, because I think people are listening and thinking, that's me, that's my kid, this is what I need. I didn't know what I needed and want to know like what is available to them to better support their kids.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, and there's parents who are listening who are saying, she's mentioned autism and I don't have an autistic kid. Does this apply to me? And the answer is yes, right? So in 2011, I left my speech therapy career to get certified as a parent and life coach. And what I learned was that there are kids with all sorts of diagnoses who have a hard time with self-regulation. And it varies from kids with sensory processing disorder. They might be gifted. They might be twice exceptional. So really high functioning in one area and delayed in another area. Of course, we've got kids with different attachment disorders or attachment wounding, oppositional defiance disorder, or even the child who is described as strong-willed and spirited.
Yes, absolutely.
In all of these situations, and I'm sure more that I haven't specifically labeled in my alphabet soup of letters here, when there's fire in the brain, I find that there are 8 pillars of parenting. And when you know these and you layer them in the correct order, you begin calming the underlying reason for dysregulation, which is that fight or flight stress response. When you as a parent get really good at calming fire in the brain and then layering, here's the thing, you can't just calm the fire in the brain and say like, oh good, see, I practiced calm and now my kid's calm. And one thing's not enough. As we move our way up this ladder or up these 8 pillars, what we also need to do is we need to add in, like once you start calming adrenaline and cortisol, we need to add in exciting chemicals, neurochemistry in the brain, because the brain likes excitement and it's used to a baseline of excitement. So I have a niece, and so my kid's strong-willed, and if he's doing something great, he needs something like a bear hug and a high five and high affect, which is okay for me because I'm a national speaker, so I can like call up that energy. But my niece is really calm and she's low key, and so the type of praise that she needs, she doesn't have really high stress reactions, and she doesn't have really high happy reactions either. So kids who have more of this emotional intensity, they need more affect in building happy chemicals, like things that release dopamine and serotonin. So there are certain principles of play that you can release more laughter, that you can release more excitement in a happy way, which meets a psychological need that children have. And so if we're feeling that bucket proactively, then pursuing these stressful drama situations, creating chaos, some of those scenarios start going down. So as I walk my parents up these 8 pillars, it's basically like calm the fire, increase happy chemicals, and then a lot of things that you learn in books and on social media and from other specialists work really well. After you've done these core things, positive discipline works pretty well. Having a daily routine works pretty well. Teaching your kids repair strategies and conflict resolution and talking things out rather than acting them out work really well. And so I teach parents from pillars 1 through 8, all the way from calm the fire through conflict resolution, what they can do so that parents have a plan and they know where to pick up based on their kids' behaviors. We know if they need to be in like those lower pillars or we know if you've been really good at practicing calm, you've got quality time with your kid, you know how to label their emotions. Maybe you've taken more of a gentle parenting approach, but now you're like, but do I have to sit here for 45 minutes while my kid's kicking and screaming? Oh, no. You might also need a rhythm on how to move through those moments. You might also need positive discipline to know that you can have boundaries and you can teach your kid, like, this isn't acceptable. I don't just have to feel like I'm held hostage to these big feelings and listening to them. And so that's what's happening at Magic Glad is I'm teaching the 8 pillars in the right order based on the kid's personality and where you are as a parent and the knowledge that you have.
Right. And it seems that having parents kind of work with someone like yourself who's helping them to develop these skills really aligns well when their kids are in therapy working with a therapist themselves, because then everybody is building the skills they need to have a more harmonious home and to better connect with each other and to reduce those behaviors and those emotions that can negatively impact a home life.
Yeah, well, and especially if we want fast change, like when we were having a hard time with our kid, we wanted it changed from the moment it started. And so that could be years in the past. And so I find that parents raising emotionally intense kids usually need either like a 3-legged stool or a 4-legged stool. Oftentimes the mental health component is already at play because there's more knowledge about those different resources: play therapist, individual therapist, family therapist, something, social worker, school counselor, something like that. So the mental health leg of the stool is really important. I'm, of course, saying now, let's make sure that parents feel really supported, because they have a lot of influence on their kids and they're with them a lot. And it can make a really big difference for kids' mental health and their behavior and parents' mental health. And then the third and fourth legs of the stool that I find, I'm married to a pediatric neurological chiropractor. So what my husband Ty does here in St. Paul, Minnesota, and there are these types of chiropractors all around the country. If you're looking for somebody in that realm, I'm trying to remember Dr. Tony Ebo with PX Docs, DOCS is a really great website. But there's a lot of pediatric chiropractors who specialize in certain techniques that through body work and gentle touch points actually calm fire in the brain. So if we're working on the mental health or parenting side of things, that's like the outside that helps calm things internally. But then if you get the internal, there's 2 internal resources. So the internal resources would be something like chiropractic or reflex integration to help the body feel less reactive and the brain feel calmer. Like that would be one area. And then I know I said like 2, but I'm going to share another one. So chiropractic, reflex integration with an occupational therapist or something like that. And then nutrition. Because if there's gut inflammation, there's brain inflammation. And so when we start putting these things together, now parents who have been pursuing a bunch of resources, they say, I have all the right categories hit. Now we're really seeing progress.
Right. Right. And I love what you said about if you want to go fast, because I say this, with mental health practitioners and bringing your kid to a mental health practitioner, and also with bringing your child to see an educational therapist or a tutor, that, having that parent support just helps things move so much more quickly, because it's not about just giving your teen, the tools that they need to manage their behavior or to develop the skills they need to be successful in school. It's about you knowing how to support them when they're at home. And they're at home a lot, right? When they're at home or when they're out in the community with you, and, you're working in tandem. And I think that's so important for parents to get the support that they need in order to better support their children.
Yeah, and it helps us as parents feel such a sense of relief when we have somebody that we can talk to. And it helps us feel so uplifted when we're like, I know how to navigate this tough situation at Trader Joe's. And I know how to handle this tough situation at bedtime. So it's one thing to have, a specialist supporting your kid, but to have somebody supporting you, it's like the saying where people are like, oh yeah, I did my work so well, I put myself out of a job.
Right.
That's what we want for parents. We want you to feel like you're putting us parent coaches out of a job. And one of the really big differences in parent coaching versus therapy, because I've asked my mental health professional friends and many, many different fields and many different titles that they have, I said, well, why are you asking me for parenting tools? I don't understand. Like, you're specializing in working with families or with kids. And they say, because I wasn't taught parenting tools. And parent coaching is to give you tools. Parent coaching is tool oriented. But the second thing that I've heard from friends who have their own kids, they say, I'm staying awake at night, racking my brain how to have this sensitive conversation with parents because there's not a framework for how to talk to parents. And so that's really what we're doing here is we're saying, we're going to approach the topics that are sensitive. We're going to talk about them in a way that's compassionate and loving. And we're also going to help hold you accountable to your goals because we know you love your kid and we love you and your kid. So let's make family life feel better.
Absolutely. Samantha, there are some conversations that I have, and I know that they're going to be helpful for parents. Others I know they're going to be eye-opening for educators, youth service providers, but this is one of those conversations that I know will provide everyone with helpful insights. So I can't thank you enough for being here.
Thank you. It is such a pleasure. Thank you for having me, Karen.
If listeners want to get in touch with you and learn more about how to support their emotionally intense kiddos, what is the best way for them to connect with you?
Website, everything's on there. Samantha Moe, so that's MOE, SamanthaMoe.com. And you can send me an email. If you're feeling some chaos or crisis in your life, it's easier to connect with a human being. So hello@SamanthaMoe.com is the best email address to reach myself or my assistant.
Perfect. Thanks again for being here. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Karen.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Diverse Thinking, Different Learning podcast. Be sure to check the show notes to learn more about our guest, Samantha Moe. I hope you've gained some fresh insights and perspectives. And if you're hungry for resources and want to stay ahead of the curve, be sure to join our email list. By signing up, you'll be the first to know about upcoming events, workshops, and exclusive resources designed to support children who think and learn differently. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.